Ariel Gold is the current executive director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation and an expert on Israel-Palestine. And I'm just delighted she can be with us. Many of you know, A.J. Muste was the executive director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation for many years in the 1940s and 50s. So she kind of represents the continuing life of that organization, and I'm really interested to hear from her about that. So Ariel, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really prefer much more of a conversation, so I'm going to speak for a little bit, and then I'd really rather hear from you and have it be a back and forth. So I want to give I want to start with a little bit of history of and what Fellowship of Reconciliation is, and A.J. Muste's role in it, and a bit of our continuum. So we are Fellowship of Reconciliation. We're the oldest interfaith peace and justice organization in the US as well as the world. We formed in 1914 in Europe, and legend has it that a British Quaker and a Lutheran German on a railway platform coming from a conference about avoiding World War I shook hands and pledged to each other, we are one in Christ and we will never go to war. Now, clearly their countries weren't quite of that nature, and Britain did enter World War I, but the Fellowship of Reconciliation was birthed through that. And then in 1815, as the US was considering entry to World War I as well, there was a conference in Long Island. Some of the folks from Europe came over, and Fellowship of Reconciliation USA was formed. And A.J. Muste was not only our director in the 40s, but really with FOR USA and International FOR from the very beginning and throughout. He was one of our founders in many ways, along with Jane Addams. And both of them were incredibly unpopular at the time in World War I for their opposition to US entry to the war. And we've actually been going back and archiving. We have, FOR has been producing a hard copy magazine since 1918. And we've actually been going back and archiving it, so I've been spending a lot of time kind of going through that lately. And one of the things that's been, really phenomenal about that is reading all kinds of writings from A.J. Muste and seeing his prominence in our organization, even when he didn't have articles in the magazine in the 1920s and 30s. He was often a contributing editor to the magazine. And so really influenced us from the very beginning through today. And what I would say is, I would really say that he was foundational for Fellowship of Reconciliation, not only because of the span of time with which he was with us, but because we benefited, FOR did, from his transformational processes, from pacifist to labor organizer to Marxist, giving up pacifism for a while, and then coming back. And when he came back to pacifism, which is when he directed FOR, when he led FOR, which I'm doing now, filling in his incredible shoes, I would say that it wasn't just a return to pacifism, but it was really a combining of the radical and proactive, rather than passive elements of Marxism and labor organizing that he had experienced in his career, because prior to Muste's leadership, we were largely a big tent organization for pacifists, whether that was World War I or controversially World War II, which was under his leadership largely, but much more passive in such. Much more about the personal, religious feeling that one could participate in more. We did often have political analysis that took place in our magazine, but we much more watched from the sidelines and thought of ourselves on how do we, as at the time Christian men largely, but we could expand that today to all people, how do we relate to each other? What are our, what is fellowship between us, and what are our obligations and our needs under Christ to be unto each other, right? We could say, do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto us. And when Muste took leadership, it was him that moved Fellowship of Reconciliation from that much more individual and I would say passive form of pacifism into radical nonviolence. He having studied under Gandhi, and so when he took the helm, he wrote about he was ferociously opposed to Hitler. It was anything but passive, and ferociously opposed to and worried about the fascism that was taking over Europe, worried about that taking hold in the US, but believed that there were other ways than war, and that deep belief that war itself is an abomination of God, and that we can never truly achieve a just and peace society through violence. And so along with, when in 1940, when he supported conscientious objectors to World War II, a lot of Quakers, including Bayard Rustin, what he saw this was not just an opportunity to ensure the rights of conscientious objection, but what could be done for society within this moment. And so he organized the conscientious objectors in World War II to do all kinds of work, and the highlight of that is really Bayard Rustin, who during his imprisoned for 3 years for refusal to serve in World War II. During his time in prison, he, who had also studied under Gandhi, was a disciple of Gandhi's, organized the prisoners, the conscientious objectors in the prisons, to oppose the racial segregation in the prisons. And he was so effective at this that he was declared a dangerous threat and transferred in the prisons. He would be placed in solitary confinement and would sing from his cell strange fruit, and the other prisoners who could hear would start to sing along, and that would gather and grow in the prison. And at the same time, they had hunger strikes in the prisons, organized by him. And this was that idea of pacifism, not being passive in any way, right? If we're not going to serve in this war, even in a capacity of civil service, what can be done that really transforms society? And upon Rustin's release from prison, it was A.J. Muste who hired him and made this again transformation of Fellowship of Reconciliation to confront issues rather than them being confronted upon us, right? Like opposition to war and then conscription and then refusal, but to take an active participation in the civil rights movement and to challenge segregation. And Rustin then traveled the country organizing communities. This is before meeting Dr. King later. Organizing communities and organized what was the first Freedom Ride. And so it was under A.J. Muste's leadership that FOR decided to take on racial injustice rather than simply our pacifist religious roots, but to really be proactive and to teach Gandhian nonviolence throughout the country, and including that came to be much of teaching Dr. King. So I want to apply a little bit of this today in FOR's work right now, as we are in the midst of watching a genocide unfold in real time before our eyes on our TV sets and social media accounts. And I want to name that I'm the first non-Christian and first Jewish executive director of FOR, which is both a deep honor to me and I think became really essential in this moment where my people are the people carrying out this genocide. So I want to speak a bit about, kind of where this legacy is of choice, of active resistance to war and violence and the inhumanity, or I would also say the corruption of the name of God, perversion of that. So today in Israel, we have, since the war broke out on October 7th, there have been two conscientious objectors to the war. Two young people who, upon graduating from high school, when they got their conscription, chose to go to prison. And what's exceptional about this isn't the fact that they're in prison. Their prison conditions are really comfortable, especially compared to, really comfortable when you compare that to the Palestinians from the West Bank and from Gaza, who are held without charge or trial under administrative detention. I believe it's at least 27 prisoners from Gaza have already died in custody. In the West Bank, the prison conditions are overcrowded and unsanitary. There are sexual abuse and grotesque violence have been documented recently. So Tal and Sophia, who are the two so far that have objected to their service, are not in those kinds of conditions at all. And in fact, they receive short-term sentences, usually between 20 and 30 days at a time, and that can add up to maybe 2 years at most. And they're released in between those sentences for a couple of days to see if they've changed their mind. But that also allows them to go home for a moment and to gather new books or whatever. So it's not that the conditions are horrible, and it's not that they have no other choice. In fact, 12% of conscripted Israelis, which are all men and women, as well as the Druze, 12% of conscripted Israelis get out of service on a mental health exemption, which is notoriously easy to obtain. As Israel doesn't have a problem gathering their numbers, that's notoriously easy, and there are plenty of civil service options. You can serve in a hospital or in other capacities. But what is exceptional about Tal and Sophia is that they did this as an active choice. An active choice. They could have easily gotten out of prison or served in another capacity, but they chose, they said, we want to actively resist this such that our actions and will be seen and our words may be listened to, and that we may influence even one other person. And this, for me, is kind of the heart of A.J. Muste's contribution to Fellowship of Reconciliation, this kind of spirit of active pacifist resistance. And it's enormously unpopular as well, because it was under A.J. Muste's tenure that we finally saw really, I think, the first time in the world that conscientious objection became popular, which was during the Vietnam War. Other than during the Vietnam War, it was a very difficult position to take. And most conscientious objectors who date all the way back to BC were killed or, jailed and then usually killed. We had some during World War II, an Austrian who became very famous and was canonized later, but at the time was executed. And for decades after that, he was still maligned in the church and seen as a traitor for having refused to serve under Hitler. So that's the general history. And then we have this moment where conscientious objection, where pacifism becomes popular during the Vietnam War, but it takes so much of resisting during those unpopular times during the times that it's more difficult, if we're ever to hope to get to these moments where an anti-war movement is robust and spreading and popular, and if we look at Israeli society today, I mean, I think it's close to over 70% of Israeli Jews don't want any humanitarian aid to enter Gaza at all until all of the hostages are released. So really support the starvation of an entire people. And that's the makeup of Israeli society today. It has taken a very hard turn to the far right. And so we have these few brave people who are coming forward and setting an example and placing their mark on history. And they stand on the shoulders of giants. And one of those, most important in this work and this transforming of pacifism and conscientious objection into active participatory nonviolence would be A.J. Muste. So with that, I want to kind of open this up into conversation, whether about Fellowship of Reconciliation, Muste's time, and it's still controversial today that he supported conscientious objection during World War II, or anything of the like.
I'm wondering if it would work to set up this microphone so that people can
pass it around the other way.
maybe it will do that too if the cord will go that far. Yeah, try that. Yeah.
As you were talking, I was just making a mental list of people who, in prison, their thoughts seemed to be clarified and sometimes even did some significant writing. And here's people that came to mind. Muste. I'll be talking about Bertrand Russell in the talk after you. He's another one that spent time behind bars because of his thoughts. Of course, Henry David Thoreau, Malcolm X, Adolf Hitler, and going way back, the Apostle Paul. So all these people, a lot of them wrote from prison and seemed to give them time and space to kind of clarify their thoughts.
Were you able to hear that okay?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. If we could take if there's a couple more, otherwise I'll go from that. And I'll begin by saying I really appreciated the acknowledgement that it's not only a positive transformation, right? You mentioned Adolf Hitler as one of them.
Do I say Shalom Shabbat?
Thank you.
I have done not the kind of research that Joanne Robinson and Leila Danielson have done, but I spent a lot of time with the Swarthmore Peace Collection, and I will tell you they have the first records of the FOR are from the year 1915. AJ is not on the list. They're missing 1916. By 1917, AJ and Anna are on the list.
Yes, he was involved with us as early as 1915, but became more prominent in the following years. And I believe, so Swarthmore is some of our archives, and we're in this process now of getting the rest of our archives digitized. So in this case, we have in our basement of our office just boxes of Fellowship magazine, from 1918 and such. And so we're in the process of digitizing them, and I believe it's around 1928 that I've seen the first with Muste's being repeatedly listed on the magazine as a contributing editor. And I want to say as well, as we're just starting this archiving process, but we will be releasing curated archives, so a look at, for example, and I'm very fascinated by a look historically at FOR's positions on Zionism and anti-Semitism, and that whole period of, and for anybody who's wondering, we opposed Zionism as early as the 1920s, writing that This was a very dangerous undertaking. The dispossession of land from one people for another people would likely require that land to be held by force and likely not go well. Surprise, that is what happened. But so we're looking forward to having publicly available, kind of curated aspects of FOR's history that way, sometimes by author, A.J. Muste, for example, as well as many others, and sometimes by region or topic, whether it's debates on violence and pacifism and different forms of pacifism, or looking at, China throughout history.
Hi, sorry, I'll walk over so you can at least see me. Where's the camera? Oh, there it is.
It's on, the camera is on the computer here. So.
Could you just talk a little bit about what programs or projects the FOR is currently involved in around the conflict in Gaza and any other conflicts that are going on right now?
Absolutely, I would love to, and we are extremely busy right now dealing with the conflict in Gaza. So along with analysis and education, a number of articles from our staff, including myself, we have been working in coalition largely with faith-based organizations. So in January, we were part of a really phenomenal emergency summit for Gaza that took place in Chicago at Rainbow Push Coalition's headquarters with Reverend Jesse Jackson, who has been working on this issue since the 1970s. Professor Mark Lamont Hill and Peter Beinart were speakers, Wes Branford Michelson. So a really deep, discussion and look at that. And that was shortly followed by the Chicago ceasefire resolution vote, which we are proud to say we think we had, were part of seeing that get passed. It passed by one single vote. It was the mayor who broke the tie to get that passed. So again, that kind of inspiration and transformational and education about this issue. Right now, at this moment, we are working with Rabbis for Ceasefire, Muslim Community Network, Hindus for Human Rights, Kairos, and others. And we are in the midst of having a series of iftars for ceasefire, as we are currently in this Ramadan season, and bringing together Jewish and Christian prayers, Hindu prayers, along with Muslim prayers. And these are taking place across the country. They kicked off just yesterday, which was we're in the Lenten season, during Ramadan, and yesterday was the Jewish fast day of Esther. So it kicked off yesterday in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Boston, Manhattan. I personally was at one in Paterson, New Jersey, hosted by the mayor there, and Paterson is the largest Palestinian American community concentration in the US. And these are going to be continuing for the next couple of weeks. And so this is part of these large coalitions that we've been forming, these multi-faith committed to ceasefire. We were also part of, they're ongoing, pilgrimages for ceasefire. There was one that we took part in that walked from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. And just next week, we're going to be at one. We've been working with Red Letter Christians, Freedom Rights, and other organizations in Philadelphia for a Holy Week pilgrimage for peace that will honor the Stations of the Cross, and then end up at Lockheed Martin, where a number of us will risk arrest to draw attention to the role that weapons companies are playing in this genocide taking place. So we're also taking part in, there's a conference coming up in South Africa to look not just at this current outbreak of violence, but the larger picture of Israeli apartheid, and look at that in historical context of South African apartheid. So, and then there's quite a lot more, but yeah, we're very, very busy in this time, and I have to say that I'm quite inspired by those who came before us at different times in FOR's history to take this important position in this moment that, you know, as I often say, these are the times that define us. And this is work that can be very difficult, including for some aspects of our membership. It's a challenging and painful topic, I should say, for Jews. A painful process to go through, and it requires as well the willingness to have that same kind of deep introspection that we were talking about takes place in prison, or that Muste was willing to grapple with as he grappled with his own pacifism. And it's I consider it a type of mourning for Jewish community as we confront this horrifically dark side of ourselves, and I would say the reality that we can and are committing the same level of crimes that throughout history have been committed against us.
Hi, Ariel. I'm Chris Muste. I'm AJ's grandson. And the previous questioner was Peter, my brother, one of AJ's other grandsons. Thank you for your work leading FOR. I have one question that I think it would help us in general. Probably there are people here who know a lot more about FOR than I do. But I wonder if you could describe to us internally within FOR the process that you've gone through in coming to your decisions about what to do about the current situation in Gaza and more generally in places like Ukraine or other strife-torn areas. And I'm especially thinking of how does FOR, which for a long time was predominantly a Christian organization, deal with the Christian and Muslim and Jewish and other faith communities within the FOR?
Thank you. That's a really important question, and I should say it's one that I grapple with. And I'm going to begin with a little bit of my personal history before coming on to FOR, and frame that within the context that I believe that this was kind of meant to be, that this would be the time that I ended up leaving FOR. So I was raised entirely secular. I didn't have a bat mitzvah, I didn't know even the most central prayers of Judaism. And as I came into adulthood, I felt that was something that I had really missed out on. And so I started embarking on my own self-education of Judaism. And you know, at first that involved a real excitement around Israel. I remember going to an Israel street fair that I came across. And my family in particular, one branch of my family who immigrated from Poland, my grandmother in the early 1900s, were early Jabotinsky Zionists, which is the form of Zionism, strain of Zionism that is today, that kind of won out. And in the early 1900s raised money for the establishment of the State of Israel here in the US. So I was taking some pride in that as well. And then as I continued on that journey, started to uncover and discover what was happening in the land so holy to me, as well as to Christians and Muslims. And I was raised in the anti-nuclear peace movement on the Great American Peace March and the protests against nuclear testing in Nevada. So I knew there was no question as to which side I was on, and yet it was confusing and challenging. And eventually, a friend said to me, "Go there and see with your own eyes." And I went on a delegation to the West Bank to see for myself. It was the first time that I had been to Israel, Palestine in my life, and this is where I call it mourning. It was a deeply painful experience for me and process for me, and an experience of being torn as well. I think here I was, for the first time, not a minority, like among my people and in this land that's historic to us, and yet confronted with grotesque racism and violence that was horrifying. And it took for me, I think, a few months of grief to process that and process the lessons that I'd been told from my family or from my first encounters, exploring Judaism, that we are inherently a good people and inherently, don't do these kinds of things, which of course we are human like all people, and all people susceptible to the banality of evil and to militarism. And after that, I started traveling to Israel and Palestine once or twice a year to work with Palestinian nonviolent human rights defenders in the West Bank. And I took my children there between their bar and bat mitzvahs to balance the Jewish establishment experiences they were having in the US, and we spent 3 weeks living with Palestinian families in the West Bank and traveling around. And in 2017, I was noticed enough by the right-wing settler movement there that they launched a campaign to have me deported. And in 2018, when I went back, I was interrogated for 7 hours and then deported and on the front page of Israeli newspapers across that country. So I came in with that background, and the choice to hire me was within that context. I can only say an aspect of that being, in the legacy of A.J. Muste, to proactively take part in the resistance of an ongoing war on the Palestinian people. And when I came into FOR, I was actually looking forward to kind of a break from Middle East work, which can be very difficult and challenging. And really, we're working a lot on, as well at FOR right now, on gun violence prevention and confronting Christian and other forms of religious nationalism. And I was really looking forward to doing a bunch of domestic work and didn't have the expectation, that this particular level of war and violence would break out. But when it did, it was no question to me how we would confront this as Fellowship of Reconciliation, what our positions would be in opposition to this genocide, and then it was only a question of where would we find our niche. What would be the best way for us to engage in peacemaking and building those pieces together. And that took a little bit of trial and error, right? Of different engagements, and then showing up, really finding and helping form this multi-faith coalition that's working together right now. And I want to lead this into the questions of multi-faith and within FOR, because there are some real difficulties here as well. We have issues in Islam currently, including opposition to LGBTQ+ rights. We have some Muslim communities in the country working, promoting parental choice so that their children can opt out of education on trans rights, which is, deeply, deeply problematic. We also have crossovers where anti-Semitism sneaks into this movement for Palestinian rights, whether from traditional Christian ways that anti-Semitism has manifested itself, or through some Palestinian organizations. And we also have, this movement for ceasefire right now is a mixture of folks, and there are some like FOR that are committed very deeply to nonviolence, and there are others that are not so. And so this required as well the crafting of our principles at FOR that are universal across faiths, so that we are opposing all forms of violence and hatred in all faiths and genders and capacities. And going back to A.J. Muste, where we are recognizing and putting up front that there is no military solution, that as Muste would say, as Muste so famously said, there is no way to peace, peace is the way. And just the simple recognition, right, as death is being just raining down upon Gaza, there is no elimination of Hamas, right? You cannot militarily eliminate an ideology, right? Instead, you actually give birth to it over and over and over again, like we saw with the Iraq War and ISIS, coming out of that. What we will see from this genocide, from every child who is maimed and killed, is we see the recruits for Hamas 2.0 and 3.0 and 4.0 to be even more radicalized. And we see anti-Semitism spreading at a much larger level. And so like A.J. Muste with that, we have declared that there is only peacemaking that is possible for a just solution, for the release of hostages, for the hope of coexistence. And so how do we hold that very difficult space, which also means that we don't have a solution, really, to this. I don't see an easy to achieve kind of good thing coming out of this, but yet we have to do the work day by day in that direction.
Hi, Ariel. Good morning. This is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
I wanted to ask you about how you're defining anti-Semitism, because it's becoming a difficult topic. Anti-Zionism is often defined as anti-Semitism. And then also the question on campuses where young students and older students who are steeped in traditional Zionism or religious nationalism are now feeling unsafe on campus. And how do you define anti-Semitism versus just criticism of the state of Israel's policies and separateness?
Yeah, well, I'll begin by saying how extremely dangerous I think it is that on a legal level and across many countries, especially Germany, for example, criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism is being legally defined as anti-Semitism and falsely defined as. And why I say that's dangerous is I find even among the left, if I might call out an actual form of anti-Semitism, I'll name like Robert Kennedy, for example, who spouts blatant, classic anti-Semitism. Well, coincidentally or not, being a supporter of Israel, but when I sometimes call that out, even among the left, they take it with a grain of salt, right? Another accusation of anti-Semitism, there's false accusations of anti-Semitism, flying all over the place. And so when you have this falsehood of it, you don't take seriously the actual rise of anti-Semitism that is taking place worldwide. And that has, kind of always existed, and it does play a role in the left and Palestinian rights or movements. So, that's like the first thing that I would say that I think is extremely, extremely dangerous in this time. So I myself identify as an anti-Zionist. I know there are different definitions that people use. Martin Buber, for example, an early form of Zionism that did not win out, saw coexistence, and so some folks have kind of redefined that for themselves. We do have, it is dangerously on the rise, and it's also very difficult to track its rise because the main organization that is tracking and anti-Semitism and documenting it is the Anti-Defamation League, who both themselves promotes grotesque Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism, and falsely defines anti-Semitism as criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism. So one of their more recent reports on the rise of anti-Semitism, which is rising, defined anti-Semitic acts as, included in their definition of anti-Semitic acts that they compiled, protests for ceasefire. So you have this, mess in that sense, and is also right now viciously attacking Jews for ceasefire and anti-Zionist Jews, and accusing us of, just yesterday, accusing us of being fake Jews. So it's a very complicated time for that, but what we are also seeing is, especially from Jewish youth, a real transformation of American Jewry on this issue, being inspired largely by the younger generation, but Jews every day are, what I call that grappling and mourning, are questioning this and questioning the values of American Jewry, which have long been associated with justice and civil rights, against what's happening in this very militaristic, nationalistic, and fascist state, and being carried out in our names. And so that movement is growing rapidly, and which is the anti-Zionist movement as well, whether it has received that name yet or not entirely. But it's growing rapidly, and I would say provides so many people, including myself, with a lot of solace in these really dark times, where I worry as well about Israel, as it is so isolated, and what is to come. And I worry so much about, and I have family there, and dear friends, and I worry about the safety in the coming years or the coming decades, and deeply panicked about that, and care very deeply for my people, and as well caring very deeply for the Jewish collective soul, as Israel has turned so far to the right. We have the most fascist right-wing government right now that Israel has ever seen in its history. The coalition is made up of Kahanists. And Kahanism is a movement that started in the 70s but was very small, and it's the equivalent of the Jewish Ku Klux Klan. So if you think of like David Duke having a very prominent position in the US government and Congress, that's the equivalent of Israel's parliament right now. And so when we hear, Biden saying, this isn't, Netanyahu isn't representing the Israeli people, and this isn't, isn't fulfilling their desires, he's actually wrong. Netanyahu is representing the Israeli people in this current moment. I mean, the vast majority, including Israelis who are unhappy with Netanyahu and want to see him ousted, that's on domestic issues. On the war in Gaza, there's a majority of Israelis that support Netanyahu's actions, and that's the reality right now. And so, how do we confront that as a people? Which goes back to these questions, and I was reading an article, archived article about Muste recently, and he had said in a Quaker meeting, if I can't love Hitler, then I can't truly love anybody, right? And we can think of Martin Luther King, as well on this, and the love thy enemy. But what is it as well, right? These are my people. And while I don't want to, it doesn't do any good to deny the reality of where things are at in this country, where refusal to serve in the West Bank occupation or the war in Gaza right now are deeply unpopular. We have all of two conscientious objectors at the moment, and still love my people, some of whom are my family members, and advocate for peace and safety and justice for Palestinians and at the same time hold the necessity of the transformation of all people there from hatred and violence to one of coexistence, which is a difficult, battle. It's much easier to take, malign one people. And it's a delicate balance that A.J. Muste had of loving all people and again, this is that transformation of FOR, taking sides, right? So prior to A.J. Muste's leadership at FOR, we supported conscientious objection, but we also didn't really take positions on different sides. We kind of, thought they were all valid, and A.J. Muste was like, nope, not all valid. Like, racism, bad. And transformed FOR into that challenge of taking sides, and yet knowing that the only real solutions come from the transformation of society.
I hope I'm not going to fumble this, but I've been thinking as you were talking, I so appreciate what you're saying, and I think it's so important that people who are Jewish are courageous enough to challenge the policies of Israel. We may regret what Chuck Schumer said, but his position as a Jewish man challenging Israel, I think, was very important, and the same for Bernie Sanders, whom I love. He doesn't know it, but I'm thinking as you're talking about something that hasn't come up yet, but I think it's parallel, and that is the cycle of child abuse.
Sorry, say that again?
The cycle of child abuse, that abused children can become abusers themselves. And you would think that somebody who had suffered abuse would resolve never to perpetrate it. But I think perhaps if you have been a victim, the only way to really feel free of that is to become a victimizer and say, I'm the one who has the power right now. When I talk about this in my class, I sometimes quote the poet W.H. Auden in his poem September 1939, where he says, what all school children learn, those to whom evil is done do evil in return. So perhaps there's a deeply psychological trauma among Jewish people and resolve never to be victims again. And of course that can be carried into a devastating cycle of abuse. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to wonder, I think this is both true and not true, because again, if we look at American Jewry, who are as well products of the Holocaust, and before the Holocaust, many generations of anti-Semitism and violence, American Jewry has largely been committed to justice, and so I must wonder many times if Buber's strain of Zionism, which was coexistence, had won out, or if Israel hadn't been established in that day, and instead the refugees from the Holocaust were allowed into the United States and other places, if there was refuge and different types of justice at that time, if we would be in this circumstance as well. And I often think of this as a lack of exceptionalism, as that banality of evil. And A.J. Muste spoke about this. He spoke about the rise of Nazism in Europe, and how he spoke of a German woman teacher who initially refused to take the Hitler Oath and replace a picture of Spinoza with Hitler, but then her students convinced her that she could do more as a professor than she could by resisting. And this desire of all people, this universal desire to fit in, to be a part of their church, of their government, of their university, and so it was less the leaders of the Nazi regime, or at least as much the complicity of everyday people, German and Polish and otherwise, that allowed that horrible tragedy to take place. And I would say the same very much of Israelis today. It is that banality of evil. And this would be a form of anti-Semitism that can come up sometimes, of exceptionalizing the Jewish people to say or Israelis to say that they are bloodthirsty, and really enjoy this violence. Where again, I see it as banal. War inherently inspires grotesque acts beyond human nature and beyond war, those war crimes that we're seeing Israelis carry out right now. So we see Israeli soldiers shooting unarmed Palestinian civilians, running, and then posting it to social media and bragging about it. I don't find that any more exceptional than I find the sexual violence that Hamas carried out in its October 7th attack exceptional. This is the nature, this is the very nature of war. And so how is it that we transform an entire society and worldwide, which is this much larger project, and one that FOR has long been engaged in.
Last question.
Piggybacking off Kathleen's question, yesterday we heard the quote, "Pain not transformed is transmitted." And that would certainly apply to this. And it raises the question in my mind, who does Netanyahu, who is he talking to and thinks is convinced when he says this war will continue until they get the very last Hamas? I mean, what does he mean by the last one? Are they not just sowing seeds for generations of future conflict? If they thought at all, I'd realize if the Palestinians and Gazans are anything like us, they're going to totally resent and be hateful towards us because of this. I mean, does he actually have an audience when he says that? Are there people who believe it?
Absolutely. Whether or not they believe that they can eliminate Hamas, that this is the Israeli public these days. That hasn't always been the case. There used to be a robust Israeli peace movement, and I would say years of complicity and years of conscription to militarism, to war, and years of serving in the West Bank, and the walls that you put up, the literal walls. Israelis do not go 30 minutes away, and no, they don't have any vision, any idea what the West Bank is. So these years have created an Israeli public, much like, I know Holocaust comparisons are controversial, but I think sometimes they're very fitting. Much like, Nazi society created, it's never just the leaders, right? It's what you create in society. So it created an Israeli society that absolutely supports or believes that. We have polling on the number of Israeli Jews who want to see settlements move into Gaza. Jared Kushner he's got an audience too when he talks about beachfront property. And so Netanyahu is speaking to his supporters, to the most popular audience right now, political movement right now, which is religious Zionism or Kahanism there, that believes that this land should be emptied of Palestinians and that Jews should take over that land. And so that's the audience that he has. And I want to speak to Chuck Schumer, though, because I forgot to mention that I really love what he said, and yet I think it isn't being interpreted yet to its full strength. Schumer framed it, and he's being heard as just speaking out against Netanyahu and calling for new elections. But at the same time, what he said, his condemnation of acts that are being carried out, far transcend this very shrewd politician, which Netanyahu is. And so when someday, whether it's new elections this year or 10 years from now and Netanyahu isn't in power, that position that Schumer took will still exist without the identification with just one person, but instead as a position against these horrific war crimes.
I mean, it's time for us to take a break, but I want to thank you, Ariel. This has been wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah, so let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll reconvene.
Wow.
So I won't be able to talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, I should tell you. I don't think I'm walking out of here. Good to see you. I was at the last meeting, but I couldn't get a video. Oh, but I should have.
I don't know. Okay, all right.
Hi, I thought you were speaking at, so you were speaking at Chip. Yeah. Okay, I wanted to, like the guy walking around.
I know. And I thought, and I was thinking about this a lot last night. And I thought, all right, David, you're stuck in the back door with the power. You shouldn't go out in the front door. But I'm still grateful.
But I know how it functions, so, no, I just came from that.
When I asked God to show me the fault, and you know what? He does.
Yeah,
Be
you're right.
careful
I want to
when
read
you
it
ask
again.
that.
You're gonna get an answer.
You're going to get me. Here are your faults.
And this is the or was it?
No, this is long, this is 20 years.
Okay, so.
So, but it's something that I've thought of for 20 years. Well, I should have done better. I could have done better. I didn't. We do. Yeah, we do. Well, and thank you for being here. Yeah, well, yes, I know.
It was really chilly last night, very tall. Yeah. That was, yeah. I never. Yeah. Do you live in Holland? Yes. Oh.
I was really fortunate.
Yeah.
Remember, if you don't go to that, you don't come to yours.
Oh,
I have the family, like, I actually have a million.
which one? Okay. Junior, yeah. Oh, really?
For 7 years in
Okay.
Yes. So I discovered. So I didn't know if you're reading.
Yeah, what makes you come alive?
Yes.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like,
Yeah, she talks a lot about his life, his early childhood.
Yeah, Adam.
Yeah, I'm not very far.
But you like it.
Yeah. In fact, I got it from the library, but I think, sometimes I think, is this a book I want to have, I want to know, or do I underline? Yeah, and so I need to just go to sleep on it. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Very,
Yeah.
very,
I will. Ideas of what you can do, or think about, visually thought provoking. Yeah. It's really. And I hadn't even heard of it. No, I didn't. And then, we have what we call inclinations, like the adult class after, church, just for, 5 or 6 weeks. Be there at one of them, said music thing I had to do something else. But tomorrow's the last one. I have a whole story. I mean, I'll turn it book. So it looks like, yeah, it's, so not, I don't know, one lady has a book with her, and, I know our pastor, one of our pastors, Jen Porter, she's leading the discussion, and, so she has, she's reading the book, and I can tell sometimes when she says something, I just really like. Oh, no, I'm serious. She talks about silence, a lot, and he, now we're really talking, like, this weekend it was, she played a recording, but you didn't understand, but, it was all recorded. What were the words?
Danny,
We didn't get all.
good to see you and Susan, my neighbor.
Yeah, because pause, like that, and then he'd say a couple words and pause.
Same.
And then she said, so what did you guys get out of that? And then we're like, a few of us, I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, sort of like that. But, somebody, a few people said, I don't get a lot of it. I said, okay, I get it. But she said, did you notice the cadence, how he would just say a word? Documents, and have the book.
Sorry about that.
We always want to fill
Oh, I know.
with talking.
And then you like pause and somebody like interjects or yeah. Hi, Judy. That was so fun.
Yeah, welcome back. You want to introduce the next speaker? My friend Tim Hennings.
Yeah. Like I said, yeah, it's so good. You could literally drop the mic again.
So Tim Hennings is a professor of mathematics at Calvin University currently, and he used to teach at Pope. That's how I know him, and he was a longtime member of the.
Can you speak into the loudspeaker?
He was a longtime member of the committee that organizes the Muste Lecture. And he and I are also longtime participants in a little discussion group that reads the works of C.S. Lewis and talks about them together. That's how we've interacted most in recent years. So I'm glad he is willing to participate in this and speak about another side of A.J. Muste. Contemporaries, A.J. Muste and Bertrand Russell, opposing worldviews, kindred spirits. So please welcome Tim.
Thank you, Curtis. I came to Hope in 1988, and soon after learned about A.J. Muste and the Muste Committee, and one of, I guess, the foremost kind of person on that committee was Don Cronkite, who I considered one of my mentors, kind of an informal mentor. He was like Muste, had kind of Quakerism in his blood. I just talked with his wife Jane. We were talking last night, and thank you. I'm glad you can be here. But he was an influence on the whole campus, and and he really breathed life into the whole Muste committee and into the whole cause. And I remember he had a T-shirt that he would often wear at these events. And after he died several years ago of Parkinson's, I mentioned it to Jane, and she said, "Oh, I still have it. Would you like it?" And so, in honor of him, I'll wear that today. It took me a bit to understand it. He said, "Just read it out loud, and it'll make sense." Can you see what it says?
Please read it.
What's the first word? I can't see it. Visualize world peace. World peace. World peace. So,
Just a bunch of mush.
So anyway, you might think of this, or at least I'm kind of thinking of this, as a bit of an encore to the conference. An encore is kind of a light, short thing towards at the end of it, and all these contributions have been so heavy, and I've just, oh man, it's just been a wonderful conference. And this is something a little different. It's not talking about the cause as much as just the man, and in particular the man as compared to another one of my heroes, Bertrand Russell. And as you'll see here in a second, as soon as I saw a picture of Muste, for some reason, I don't know if you'll agree or not, but I just thought, wow, this reminds me of Bertrand Russell, and I was just kind of curious, what do they have in common? So when Kathleen invited us locals to give a talk, if we'd like, I said, well, this is something I might contribute, and she said, sure, go ahead. So as I say, it's a little different. It's Muste from the point of view of a mathematician, for what that's worth. Let's see. Which one? There we go. I'm guessing that this slide may speak for itself. That is, it may show why the idea of comparing these two men occurred to me in the first place. Looking at their piercing eyes, their stubborn jaws, Abraham Lincoln said that any person over 40 was responsible for their appearance. That is, 40 years is enough time for one's character to reveal itself physically in the wrinkles, the tilt of the head, the set of the jaw. The fact that these two characters look so similar, it seems to me, may be because there's something similar underneath. Let's explore that idea together. Besides their appearance, it's also worth noting that they were contemporaries. In fact, Russell, who lived to the age of 97, was born a dozen years before Muste and died 3 years after him. I'm guessing that those attending this talk, as it's clear now, are already familiar with Muste, but for completeness, I'll give a short bio of him and then a lengthier one of Russell, and then we'll discuss some similarities and differences. Born in the Netherlands in 1985 and raised in Grand Rapids, A.J. Muste, advisor to Martin Luther King, was heralded by Time magazine, as we've talked about, as the #1 U.S. pacifist. At Hope College, he played baseball, was captain of the basketball team, graduated valedictorian in 1905. He then taught at Northwestern College for a year, and upon graduating from New Brunswick Seminary, was ordained into the then Dutch Reformed Church. Muste's deep knowledge of and dedication to the scripture that he had studied since a child led him to question whether its teaching could be reconciled with the carnage that began with World War I. These questions led to a life of searching and activism, which included spending 8 days in jail at the age of 74 for climbing over a 5-foot fence into a missile construction site. With that as a brief backdrop, you'll appreciate his answer when asked by a reporter, "Do you really think that you are going to change the policies of this country by standing out here alone at night in front of the White House with a candle?" Muste replied, "Oh, I don't do this to change the country. I do this so the country won't change me." I had that on my office door for 20 years while at Hope. Muste died in 1967, 82 years old. Even that quote shows a deep similarity of the two men. The mathematician, philosopher, historian, ethicist, activist Bertrand Russell was born in 1872 into a prominent British family. His grandfather had been prime minister. John Stuart Mill was his godfather. And as a 2-year-old, Bertie sat on Queen Victoria's lap. His parents both died before his 4th birthday. So Bertrand was raised by his paternal grandparents, the Russells, in a house given to them by Queen Victoria. Russell's parents were deists, and in their will they stipulated that Bertrand would be raised as an agnostic. Unfortunately, his paternal grandmother was raised Scottish Presbyterian. They raised him as such, petitioning to change the will. However, they were progressive socially and raised him with a conscience toward social justice. In fact, Russell's guiding theme throughout his life was a Bible verse given to him by his grandmother, Exodus 23:2, "Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil." Notice the similarity here to Muste's reply to the reporter, "I'm standing here so the country doesn't change me." Russell certainly is better known than Muste. In fact, one source, I read it long ago and I've forgotten the source, described Russell as the one Brit of the 20th century who would be known in 500 years. It was either 500 or 1,000 years, but labeled him as such. That's saying quite a lot, considering he shared the century with folks such as Winston Churchill. In fact, Russell once met Churchill at a dinner party at which Churchill asked him to, quote, "Please explain calculus in 2 words or less," which Russell reported, "I did to his satisfaction." One can imagine the gleam in their eyes as they enjoyed each other's wit and intelligence. Russell was first and foremost a mathematician-logician. He was Wittgenstein's PhD advisor. You might remember that Euclid first asked the question, how do we know that the theorems of geometry are true? This led to the development of geometry, taking just 5 axioms on faith and proving the rest from these. Russell saw these as an 11-year-old, and his reaction, quote, "as dazzling as first love," may have kept him from suicide, literally. In fact, later in life, he said he considered suicide occasionally, but abstained because he would surely live to regret it. Almost 2,000 years later, Descartes applied the same question to knowledge in general. What do we know for sure? How can we prove it? Leading to his axiom, of course, I think, therefore I am. And I included just a little bit of this again, just find it kind of interesting. Go ahead, here's the sentence. Finished files are the result of years of scientific study combined with the experience of many years. Just as a quick aside, just count the number of F's. Count the number of F's in that sentence. Do it twice or so if you need to, just to make sure. Okay, who found all 3 of them? Okay, most of you. How many are there?
4.
There's 6. There's 6 in there. There's 3 ofs.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting? I use that in many talks when I'm talking about kind of the value of skepticism. Here's another one. You've seen these sort of things before, where one line is longer than the other, or are they parallel? Those I can kind of make sense of. This one here, the claim is, and it's true, what am I going to say? Those 2 tabletops have exactly the same shape. And again, I show this just because it leads to a certain humility. Here it is right here. I had to do it by hand just to prove it to myself. There it is right there. And there it is right there. Right on top. Right on top. So it's just kind of interesting what we think we know when we don't. About 2 centuries after Descartes and him trying to build up a whole epistemology beginning with I think therefore I am, mathematicians began asking the question, how do I know anything is true in mathematics? How do we know it's true or knowable? This led the logician, in fact, I'm just going to go to this slide, well, I'll just, oops, okay, yeah. Let me go back once. This led the logician Frege to spend 12 years developing a mathematical foundation for arithmetic and number theory on which the rest could lie. So he wanted to start just like Euclid did by beginning with something that everyone agreed on, something foundational, and build up the rest of mathematics for that. And he began by talking about something very simple, the sets of things. So this, I'll give you just a little history. It's kind of interesting, I think. Back in World War II, of course, the U.S. developed the atomic bomb and used it twice on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then much sooner than we expected, the Soviet Union both developed, through the use of spies, of course, the atomic bomb and also the hydrogen bomb. So hence there was this technological war, as it were, between the two nations. And then we, the United States, thought we were ahead until what happened? Sputnik. And suddenly they were ahead. And this caused a shock to the U.S. And among other things, it was decided we need to develop mathematical understanding and intuition early on in childhood rather than waiting until, whenever, graduate school. So this is the sort of thing, it's basically called the new math, which is what I learned it both in about the 7th grade, is how old I was, but it's just simple stuff. It's a Venn diagram, and you have one set is a subset of another one. If everything in here is also in here, given two sets, you can talk about the intersection of the set, is the things that are inside. So it's very simple stuff, and this is what Frege used as his foundation of mathematics. So that's just one I found on the web that kind of illustrates those ideas. Here's another one that I found right next to it, which I thought I'd include. And now I'm kind of embarrassed to include it, especially after Peter's talk last night, but I will. What's going to show up here? Now you're really curious. But look at this one. Here's intelligent design, religion, stupidity, fundamentalism, religious politics, Republicans and so on, the Dark Ages. So anyway, I'll get rid of that one. But anyway, it shows the hubris that you were talking about, that liberals tend to think towards the conservatives. So anyway, here's what happened with Frege. As I say, he spent 12 years trying to build up mathematics from just numbers and arithmetic. And once he got to this point, he gets this letter from our friend Bertrand Russell. And as I said, some sets are subsets of others. And Russell asked him this question. He said, a friend, some sets, like the set of all glasses is not itself a glass. But the set of all ideas is itself an idea. So some sets are actually contained within themselves. And so he asked this question. He said, the collection of all the collection of all sets which don't contain themselves, does that set contain itself or not? Sorry, this is from a mathematician. Okay? Does that set contain itself or not? Now, you can't unpack that, but what you can understand is a nice analogy to it. It's as if you're in this small little town and there's several barber shops on Main Street, and one barber shop proudly has a sign on the window. They're both barbers are men, and the barber shop sign says, "I shave all the men and exactly the men in town who don't shave themselves. If anyone doesn't shave themselves, that's the person I shave." And someone comes by and says, "Well, that can't be right." And why can't it be right? Who shaves the barber? He says, if the person doesn't shave themselves, I shave them. If they do shave themselves, I don't. So who shaves the barber? So it's that sort of internal contradiction that Russell found in this naive, it's called naive set theory, just a simple set theory. And Frege, for his part, puts a foreword to his second volume. It says, "A scientist can hardly meet with anything more undesirable than to have the foundation give way just as the work is finished. In this position I was put by a letter from Mr. Bertrand Russell as the work was nearly through the press." I mean, it's a lament. And here's something I think from the New Yorker. The arithmetic seems correct, yet I find myself haunted by the idea that the basic axioms on which the arithmetic is based might give rise to contradictions which would then invalidate the computations. I've tried that a few times at a restaurant. I've never gotten very far with it. Okay. So anyway, all of this, getting back to Russell, was no joy for Russell as a man who spent his teens rejecting the Christian faith, rejecting free will, life after death, and becoming an atheist by the age of 18. He wanted to find certainty in mathematics. So he and Alfred Whitehead began their own 13-year toil. Actually, it was longer than that, beginning with logic this time, to found a foundation for mathematics. And here is just one page of the book. This is his 20-year masterpiece. This is page 360 of the second volume. And notice it's at the end of this page that he finally gets to, from this proposition will follow 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay? Totally bona fide. Okay? So if nothing else, at the end of this conference, you now know this, or at least you know it if you believe all that. So there you go. So
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
At what point does he define arithmetical addition, since it needs to be defined before we can conclude that 1 plus 1 is 2?
Well, yeah. So he started with just the basic principles of logic. So at that point, it's just symbols of logic. And well, here to answer your question, here's his quote. Okay. In fact, I think I have it up here. So I'll let him answer. So listen, here's the lament again. I wanted certainty in the kind of way in which people want religious faith. I thought that certainty is more likely to be found in mathematics than elsewhere. But I discovered that many mathematical demonstrations which my teachers expected me to accept were full of fallacies, and that, if certainty were indeed discoverable in mathematics, it would be in a new field of mathematics with more solid foundations than those that had hitherto been thought secure. But as the work proceeded, I was continually reminded of the fable of the elephant and the tortoise. Having constructed an elephant upon which the mathematical world could rest, I found the elephant tottering and proceeded to construct a tortoise to keep it from falling. But the tortoise was no more secure than the elephant, and after some 20 years of arduous toil, I came to the conclusion there was nothing more that I could do in the way of making mathematical knowledge indubitable. So he admits, I mean, it's considered successful in the sense that he started with logic and built it up, but it certainly is not. There's nothing intuitive about it. There's nothing simple about it. No mathematician who does mathematics ever reads his book to make sure that they're on a solid foundation. So this, let's see. This arduous work was just one of Russell's accomplishments. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950 for his 1945 work, History of Western Philosophy. He wrote extensively on ethics, philosophy, education, religion. The Van Wylen Library has a stack of books so high. One of his best known is Why I'm Not a Christian. This one here. Here's one in praise of idleness. Very interesting. Among other things, he asked the question, during World War II, half of Britain's whole effort of the economy was spent towards the war, and yet people still had enough food and everything else, and said, if that's the case, why can't we just have 20-hour work weeks and spend the rest of the time in arts and whatnot? Yeah, I mean, a really interesting argument. Here's one called Unpopular Essays, and the preface to this just shows a little bit of his personality. Okay, here it is. A word as to the title. In the preface to my book, Human Knowledge, I said that I was writing not only for professional philosophers and that philosophy proper deals with matters of interest to the general educated public, but reviewers took me to task, saying they found parts of the book difficult and implying that my words were such as to mislead purchasers. I do not wish to expose myself again to this charge. I will therefore confess that there are several sentences of this present volume which some unusually stupid children of 10 might find a little puzzling. On this ground, I do not claim that the essays are popular, and if not popular, then unpopular. So that shows a little bit of his personality and why he was described as having died after a lifetime of disagreements. And again, I'm kind of curious if we have any discussion after this, just to what extent. I talked to both of his grandsons last night, just to what kind of a guy was AJ with regard to such things. Maybe not quite so much. And then finally, his autobiography has what I call a position paper. At Hope College, every senior takes a class called a senior seminar in which they write at the end of a life view paper, which is kind of their philosophy of life. And I used Russell extensively both in my first year seminar and in my senior seminar. So this is, I actually included in both packets. And this is his life view paper. And it's just a couple paragraphs. Some of this in particular, I think of AJ again when I hear some of this. Here's what Russell writes. 3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life. The longing for love, the search for knowledge, and the unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. These passions, like great winds, have blown me hither and thither in a wayward course over a deep ocean of anguish, reaching to the very verge of despair. I have sought love first, because it brings ecstasy so great that I often would have sacrificed all the rest of life for a few hours of this joy. I've sought it next because it relieves loneliness, the terrible loneliness in which one shivering consciousness looks over the rim of the world into the cold, unfathomable, lifeless abyss. I have sought it finally because in the union of love I have seen in mystic miniature the prefiguring vision of the heaven of saints and that saints and poets have imagined. This is what I sought, and though it may seem too good for human life, this is what at last I have found. With equal passion I've sought knowledge. I have wished to understand the hearts of men. I have wished to know why the stars shine, and I've tried to apprehend the Pythagorean power by which number holds sway over the flux. A little of this, but not much, I have achieved. Love and knowledge, so far as they were possible, led me up to the heavens. But always pity brought me back to earth. Echoes of cries of pain reverberate in my heart. Children in famine, victims tortured by oppressors, helpless old people, a hated burden to their sons, and the whole world of loneliness, poverty, and pain make a mockery of what human life should be. I long to alleviate the evil, but I cannot, and I too suffer. This has been my life. I found it worth living, and would gladly live it again if the chance were offered me. It's good to know that he did find love at last. He was married 4 times and practiced open marriage, having had many lovers, some simultaneous, throughout his life. In fact, he was terminated from the City College of New York. Who was I talking to last night about that? I can't remember. Because he held and wrote immoral views on sex and marriage, including sex before marriage, homosexuality, and open marriage. He died in 1970, as I say, after a lifetime of disagreements. So there's a snapshot of Russell. The differences between the 2 men are obvious, both in their lifestyle and in their religious beliefs, but I thought, given these significant differences, what are some of the ways in which they are similar? So here's just a few that came to mind. One is, most importantly, they were both pacifists. Lifelong conviction for both of them, extending from World War I to the Vietnam War, For Russell, and this is why I asked him the questions I did about Muste, Russell said that World War II was a great evil, but Nazi domination was worse. And so in that regard, he was willing to bend to being, if not a just war, at least a necessary war. Muste, as we saw, not. Which one of them said this? Quote, "For love of domination, we must substitute equality. For love of victory, we must substitute justice. For brutality, we must substitute intelligence. For competition, we must substitute cooperation. We must learn to think of the human race as one family."
Must.
It was Russell, in fact. Yeah, it was Russell. So it could have been either. Okay, could have been either. I imagine these two men, meeting together. I'm sure they didn't, or at least I don't know that they did. But maybe coming to blows over some of the things they disagreed with and getting into a fist fight. These two pacifists. Wouldn't that be interesting? But
It probably would have been a verbal fist fight with bad puns and
a second way, both men spent time behind bars multiple times for their convictions. As we saw above, and has been mentioned several times here, Muste spent 8 days in jail as a 74-year-old for climbing over a missile site fence and was beaten and jailed for his pro-labor demonstration and organization. Russell equaled this record. Already in World War I, Russell found himself dismissed from Trinity College, Cambridge, and in jail for his protests. When he was 89, Russell participated in an anti-nuclear demonstration. Given his age and who he was, the magistrate, this is in Britain, offered to exempt him from jail if he agreed to quit. Russell's response, "No, I won't," and he spent the next 7 days in jail. Both men, interestingly, met with Russians or Soviets and were unimpressed. Muste, of course, had his meeting with Trotsky and came away disillusioned. Russell met Lenin and was disappointed. He said that Lenin was like an opinionated professor. That's what he compared it to.
No.
Both were strong students themselves and advocates for liberal arts education. Of course, Muste was valedictorian and other, his speech and various things. Russell, as I say, was at Trinity. He became interested in elementary education in particular, and he began a Beacon Hill school for early childhood. More to their core, they both had a lifelong search for truth that led to changed beliefs. I was just thinking during the talk this morning, Nietzsche has a quote, "Only he who is willing to change is my kin," something to that effect. But to be Nietzsche considered only worthy people who are willing to change their views. Of course, Muste, let's see, this willingness led Muste to modify his original religious beliefs to things more liberal, to, of course, change his emphasis to pacifism and such. Led Russell to completely jettison his belief in God early in life and the supernatural, and then more traumatically, as we saw, to change his beliefs about the simple, easily found truths of mathematics. And both remained open and searching their entire lives. And then finally, kind of tying in with this, Leon Kass, does that name ring a bell with anyone? Does it? Okay, yep. He visited Hope years ago. University of Chicago, professor, author, doctor, chosen by George W. Bush to lead the stem cell issue. He wrote a book, Towards a More Natural Science, in which one chapter of it is entitled Morality and Mortality. And this is a quote. This is a quote from this essay with regard to the whole aging process. He says, "Most of us cease to look upon the world with fresh eyes. Little surprises us, nothing shocks us. Righteous indignation at injustice dies out. Many of us become small-souled. Our noblest ambitions begin to flag. In many ways, perhaps in the most profound ways, most of us go to sleep long before our deaths. Not so with Russell and Muste. This Muste quote in an interview for The Atlantic in 1952 is equally true of both of them and accounts for the character shown in their countenance. Quote, he said to the interviewer, "I am prepared to change my beliefs about the state of the world, but not my hopes. About that, I wish to remain constant." And he suggested the title, 80 Years of Changing Beliefs and Unchanging Hopes. I think it applies to both of them. Thank you. So Curtis, maybe we could either take questions now or just fold them in to the end. Either way, it doesn't matter.
Well, we have a couple, we can take a couple
Okay.
minutes now, I think.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. It was amazing. I think another point of contact between Muste and Russell is, Russell is a very vigorous anti-nuclear activist. So the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Okay, so anyway, there is a thing called the Russell-Einstein Manifesto, which is a statement against nuclear weapons.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Other things that come to mind as you learned a little bit about Russell. It's an honor to be here among all these people who know Muste so well. Anything else? I think, oh, there's another.
You make me think of C.P. Snow. There are two cultures. There's science culture and then there's humanities. And increasingly, they're divergent in the 20th century. STEM, is becoming triumphant. But you sort of illustrate this common ground or a harmony between them somehow, sort of mystical harmony that I think is increasingly lost on us. For Russell and Muste, they just had a natural inclination toward it, perhaps.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. True.
I think they probably did know each other. What David McReynolds had said is during the Albany incarceration for 52 days of these peace walkers that were trying to just go through town and leaflet, that Muste was down there doing his work, AJ was doing his work, and David McReynolds and the other office staff were reaching out to Bertrand Russell for help. So they had to have worked to some degree for mutual purpose.
Boy, that would be fascinating to find if there was any.
Let's go to Swarthmore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's thank Tim,
Yep.
and then we'll carry on. I need to switch the slides, but do we need a break or should we carry on? And Kathleen, what do you think? Do we need a break?
Do I need a break?
Do we need? We're a little behind. Maybe let's just carry on. Thank you.
Wow.
Carry on.
Wow.
No, I'm humbled by all these presentations. So.
So my idea for this last session, twofold. I wanted to make some time just for some conversation at the end. So if you've got things that you would like to say, and reflecting on the past couple of days, broadening the focus even from the topics that we've heard about this morning, that would be great. But I also want to frame it with this topic question about friendship. I'm a medieval literature is my area, but I'm finding myself drawn into a large kind of interdisciplinary proliferating project on friendship. I'm calling it the agency of friendship. I'll get to that, come back to that, why that term. But it strikes me that, well, I think the connection to Muste started, it must be something in the documentaries where someone's talking about Muste's genius in getting people who were disagreeing, you know, as movements on the left were fracturing, getting everybody into the same room, keeping them in the conversation. How did he do that? And it seems like friendship, maybe a gift for friendship, is part of that. But I wonder if it was more also a matter of conviction on his part and of a way that friendship was really tied to his vision for peacemaking. And so